spend a lot of time here talking about how to make the Axe effects sound awesome, and it is certainly very easy to do that if you know the right things to do. But it's also really easy to make it sound absolutely terrible. So I want to show you guys what not to do and hopefully address some common mistakes which pop up all the time. I get loads of different emails and messages, and there's always forum posts of like, hey, this thing totally sucks. What am I doing wrong? So hopefully we can address some of those. And in learning what not to do, you can be better at what you do need to do to get what you want. So the first thing is there are two global settings on the Axe FX3 that if you're running direct, you want to make sure you've got engaged, and they are global power amp modeling and global cabinet modeling. And, you know, I've been using this stuff and doing videos with this for a few years now. And recently I actually made this first error and spent the whole night fighting my guitar sound, and it was pretty embarrassing actually. So if you go to the global menu on the front panel, you can engage or disengage cab modeling. So you might dial up a preset with an amp you really like and have that global setting disengaged, and even though there's a cabinet in there, it sounds like there's not. So you get your favorite amp, but it sounds like this. And you just kind of go, why does this suck? So if you go into the global menu from the front panel, you engage cab modeling, even with like a 1x4 cabinet impulse, this sounds way better. Awesome, right? Now, with an amp like the JCM 800, you want to crank the master volume up on this thing and get some power amp distortion happening, right? And again, I'm still using this 1x4 cab, but if you have global power amp modeling disengaged, the reason you would do this, by the way, is so you can use the Axe FX as a preamp into a tube power amp, in which case you would also want to have your global cab sims disabled, because another way to suck is to use a cabinet, like a guitar cab, while you've got a cabinet in the Axe FX on, so you're double cabbing stuff. That often sounds really bad too. We'll get to that in a second. So, you know, JCM 800, bit of power amp distortion, but you've got global power amp modeling disabled. Another way to disable it is to turn the supply sag down. You get this kind of thing. It just sounds a bit flat and lifeless. If you chuck a bit of supply sag in there, you get this. And it feels way better. There's a bit of that kind of squishy compression going on that we all know and love from our favorite tube amps. Now, like I was saying, if you were running into, say, a tube amp and a cabinet, this is the sort of sound you're going to get. Like, let's put another cab on. And again, I'm just sticking to this, like, whatever the number one is. This is what you want to hear. Not this. And that's a really common mistake to avoid. So far, if you're running direct, you want cabinet modeling engaged globally. You want power amp modeling engaged globally. If you're running into a tube power amp and a guitar speaker, you want both of those disabled. Otherwise, you're going to get this like double cab sound. Or even if you're running into a solid state power amp and a guitar cabinet, don't have a cab in line there. Leave power amp modeling on in that case, but don't have a cabinet on, because you'll get this kind of terrible double cab kind of sound. So there's a few real basics that I guess are global settings. Now, there's this thing on the internet where people are like, yeah, you got to turn the mids up and turn the gain down, which definitely makes sense. Like, a lot of the time, it's easy to use too much gain and not enough mid-range. Say, let's choose a different cabinet, for example. One of my favorite, I'm just going to actually go to my first user cab because I know that one. With the JCM 800, let's pick a different amp. Let's pick the 5150. Actually, let's pick the Atomica, because this sounds great at stock settings. There's a really great guitar sound, I think. It's a little bit dark and a little bit bassy though. So, you know, you can do the opposite to that and just go, oh, I read that you got to turn the mids up and turn the gain down, and that's how you get a really good guitar sound. But you can do it too much and it sounds weak and anemic. You know, you still want enough gain there to give it a bit of sauce, right? And for that type of sound, personally, I think that's just a little bit too bottom heavy, so I would pull a bit of depth out. And I'd pull the mid-range down a bit because it's a little bit obnoxious at the moment. So you don't have to crank the mids all the way up. In fact, you can take this to the extreme where you're using an amp like the Mesa Mark Series amps in here. Say we go USA 2C++. This is a really mid-rangey amp. So you turn the mids up, you go to the graphic EQ, you turn the mids up, and you get this sound. Which is just pretty bland and uninspiring, and it doesn't have enough low end in there. Same thing, you can do way too much with the scoops, and you do this kind of thing and just go like stupid, gain all the way up, input trim, input boost, yeah. Way too much there. So there's somewhere between those extremes, there's all your favorite guitar sounds. So it really does come down to sometimes it's good to crank the mids up on some amps. In other cases, it'll make it sound like balls. So advice like that is never a cover-all statement. You really have to know a little bit about the type of amplifier you're dealing with. And my advice is always use amp models based on real-world amps you know how to use, because the Axe-Fx is really accurate. If you're a Mesa guy, start with the Mesa models. If you're a Marshall guy, start with the Marshalls. All right, let's move along now, and we'll talk about I think another thing which is really, really misunderstood, it's the difference between master volume and level. So let's do this, right? Let's bring up a Plexi, which is an amp in the real world that does not have a master volume control. And I'm just going to basically chuck it all about there. That should sound decent. Let's have a listen. That's a good starting point. So say you want to turn that down. On a real amp that has a master volume control, you turn the volume down, right? Well, on this amp, if you look at the authentic controls, and this is kind of cool, you'll notice that there's not a volume control. The input drive in the Axe-Fx is volume 1 on the real amp. But say you're using the ideal controls and you go, cool, I want to turn my amp down, and you use the master volume. And you're sort of sitting there going, dude, where's my tone gone? The reason being is that, a Plexi relies on power amp distortion. So having the master set all the way up is what you want to do. You want to use the level control in there. So if you're happy with your sound and you just want to turn it up and down, use the level control. I'll give you another example. Let's pick an amp like the Rectifier, right? So the Rectifier in the real world, the master volume basically maxes out around 2 or 3. So you're sitting there and you go, okay, cool. You've got a sound you're happy with, which may or may not be this sound, but let's try it. And say you want to turn that up. So naturally you go to the master volume control. You can see that past about 3, the amp doesn't actually get any louder. It just starts to get a lot more mid-rangey and a lot more compressed and a lot saggier. If I liked the sound of it down here, then I should use the level control to turn it up and down. So that's something I think that really, really needs to be mentioned. The other thing as well is, the great thing about the Axe-Fx to me is you want a great distorted sound, use a really great sounding distorted amp, because, in the real world, a Soldano Super Lead cranked up to 10 is just it's like an atomic bomb going off. It's too loud for most applications, whereas here, we can do that and use the level control to bring it back. We can scale our tones, but, you read Guitar 101 and you say, okay, cool, I want a metal guitar sound. What I'm going to do is I've got a clean sound from my Citrus. Where is this thing? is what happens. You know, I've got a clean sound happening, hopefully. Yeah, about here. And you go, cool, I want a metal sound, so I'm going to get drive because distortion is metal. And I'm going to choose metal zone because metal zone is the best. I'm going to put drive and bass and mid and treble. And why doesn't this sound good? Or you go, hey, I've got a metal amp that I really like the sound of, whatever that means. You know, I've got 5150. Here's my 5150. It kind of comes down to guitar common sense. Again, I actually kind of didn't mind that. It had a bit of a Swedish grindy thing going on there. But ultimately, if you can't get a good sound out of this box, it's so much more likely that you either don't know what you're doing with the tones, that you've got some kind of global setting engaged or disengaged, or you just need to go and practice some more. Because a lot of the time, just because you have a preset which says Eddie Van Halen, it's not going to make you sound like Eddie Van Halen. You've got to put the time in to understand his style of playing and understand how he actually played the guitar. And, you know, I think it helps to understand how these people dialed their amps in and get a really good understanding of all the different amp models before you just kind of blaze away and get frustrated, because that's what's going to happen. You've got this amazing piece of equipment. If you don't take the time to learn how to use it, it's just going to frustrate you, and you're going to become one of those guys on the gear page going, digital sounds bad, and, you know, I had an Axe FX and, you know, I spent all this money on it and it didn't even sound good.